Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. For the past 2 weeks, Ben and I have attempted to speak on the idea of titles, such as landscape versus wilderness photographer, artist versus photographer itself. Well, we finally got around to it. This led to talk about the professional versus amateur designations, which we both determined we aren't much fans of, as well as the starving artist trope. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Before we dive into the discussion this week, I wanted to take a moment to thank those who have decided to contribute to our Patreon. While this is ultimately a project born of passion, it nonetheless costs both time and money to produce. And though there is no expectation of financial contribution, it is highly appreciated by both Ben and myself. So for those who have contributed, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. So I found this article on Petapixel that I wanted to just kind of real quickly go over because I thought it was quite fascinating, and I'll leave it in the show notes below. But it talks about the new Nikon Z9's pre-release feature that they just put out in a firmware update, I guess. And in this article, they specifically are using this for lightning photography, which I've always been fascinated with when it comes to any kind of like big storms. A lot of the stuff that you get out in the Midwest, I've always kind of wanted to go out and photograph that, but I imagine that can be quite difficult with film, especially with a large format.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
Through this article, they talk about how like photographing during the day, especially with lightning, can be really difficult because of the logistics of it. So with this feature now, what you're doing is you're pressing halfway down on the shutter when you have this feature turned on, and the camera starts recording images at 30 frames per second in a continuous loop to the internal memory, so not the SD or whatever card they're using. So when you see the action happen, you press the shutter completely down, and the camera records the last second, half second, or 1/3 second of action from the loop onto the card, and you're choosing that designation. So in other words, it goes back in time to capture something that's already happened, which from the photographs, you can't shoot it in RAW format, so everything's automatically JPEG. But you're still getting 45 megapixels of full resolution with this. And then I guess there's an option to shoot 120 frames per second, but it's reduced to 11 megapixels. And from the looks of it too, you can access most of those images in the loop. I could be wrong there, but it almost looks as though you could access those 30 frames per second looping images. Which would be interesting in case you still somehow manage to miss the action that you're trying to photograph. I could just imagine myself doing that, pull that out and accidentally miss something. I don't know. But I just found that to be quite interesting, the kind of technology that some of these cameras are implementing and almost making it easier yet to photograph things that at one point took a lot of either aiding technology or just outright, if you want to call it talent or skill, however you want to designate that.
It's interesting. When I worked at the camera store, there were some cameras that came out that had that sort of technology, and there's always some limitations on it with regard to their resolution They certainly weren't giving me raw files, just as you had mentioned with the Nikon camera. But it is interesting, and as you were talking about the feature there, I was thinking about how that would perhaps change the perception of the work. So, like, for example, if I were to go out and if I had one of those cameras and I shot some photos, when you make the process easier, I almost wonder if it takes, I mean, I would imagine it would in some ways take away some of the joy of it. It's certainly a far different sort of photography than I do. From the standpoint of, I mean, I would have a really tough time being able to work in that environment. So for me, the thrill of capturing a photo like that, I don't know. I can't quite relate to it. But I think in general, when you make things easier, when you lower that bar of entry, then I would think that it would have perhaps a negative impact on the perception of the work.
I could see that. I mean, because you can kind of look at how some people treat photographs taken with an iPhone.
That's true.
Just because, even like a point and shoot camera anymore, which really are hard to come by, but nonetheless, there's kind of like you look down upon it. Like I even find that with like shooting with a Holga that I'll use every so often, because it's so simplified. It's just point, shoot. There's really no thinking to it, and I think that's where I have issue with a feature like that, because it seems to be getting rid of some of the thinking and, I guess you could call it, skill that goes into the photographic process.
Though another thing I was thinking about is one of the things I really do enjoy about shooting large format is the fact that you're not looking through a viewfinder as you're shooting. You're not, stuck looking into a camera as you're taking the photo. You're standing next to the camera. You're looking at the actual scene, waiting for that moment. Though I do think that it would perhaps allow more of that kind of experience for a person, photographing, storms and lightning and stuff like that, because they could just, be perhaps a little bit more in the moment, stand next to the camera, just, ready with the shutter release, but not as much trying to experience it through the camera as much as just looking at the whole environment around them. So perhaps it could be liberating in that way. Though I'm sure there's many other contexts for which a feature like that could be used. But it is fascinating. I'm sure at some point we'll see some sort of integration of AI into it, which is a whole other topic, where something will recognize that, there was a lightning. Let's choose the best frame for you and this and that. And I don't know about that. That seems to cross into a different territory where you're handing over even more control.
Right. Which then goes back to how much control do you want to be giving up to what is essentially just a machine.
Yeah. And when you do have, I find that at least with my experience based on working with, a lot of the digital stuff in the past, is that when you add more features and more options, at a certain point, it really is almost too much to consider, and you just start forgetting about some of the certain things the camera can do, versus if you distill it down to just the basics. I could see a lot of people having a camera that has a feature like that, and they wouldn't even think to necessarily use it just because you're concentrated on other things as well. But I'm all for having interesting new features like that. It will definitely be interesting to see how that affects the mentality of certain types of photography and such. But
I mean, at the end of the day, the people that were photographing storms and lightning in the first place anyway were still using technology to aid them in that process anyway. It's That's just true. Now that it's integrated into the camera itself rather than being an additional add-on or something. Like I think of astrophotography and all of the gear that you need for that specifically in order to get good photographs of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's weird for me to come from a film standpoint and think of relying on technology in order to make a photograph happen, but at the same time, if that's going to help you to create the work that you really want to create and that you love, and if you enjoy that process, then I mean, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But
so as a bit of a background for the people listening, Cody and I, we have this list of these various topics that we think would be good for the podcast. And sometimes, as we're setting up before we record, we'll go through and we'll kind of go through the list and come up with the things that we want to talk about. And there's this topic that we've had on the list for the past 2 times, maybe more.
We've wanted to talk about it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't gotten around to it yet, but I think this would be an interesting opportunity to kind of go into this topic. And it is the idea of titles in photography. What would you consider, or what sort of titles do you use for yourself when it comes to your photography?
I've been changing it up throughout the years, or at least depending on what kind of email I'm sending. Like so recently I just sent an email to, I think it's just some small like film-based online magazine, and I submitted some work for publication through there, and which I'm glad to say got accepted. It'll be in January that it'll be published, which is cool, and it's all about the family cabin. So with that, I was saying, I think I described myself as just a simply black and white photographer. But there are also times where I'll send an email and say that I'm a nature photographer. And there are other times where I'll say black and white artist or nature artist, or I change up the wording. And that's not necessarily because I don't know what to call myself so much as it is I don't know how to boil it down to being simplified. Like, because in a way, calling myself an artist, that sometimes feels like pretentious. Like,
yeah,
like I
understand that for sure.
Yeah, but I also don't necessarily identify my work as just photography because of the writing that I implement into it and all of that too. And then you get into, well, am I a nature photographer because I have been working in series of photographs of different like man-made structures and that kind of thing, which, yeah, they're not published yet, but still nature isn't 100% what I photograph. So yeah, I go back and forth. Most of the time, though, I rely on that just black and white photographer or black and white artist tagline, because that's just kind of does the best to encompass everything on my end, I think.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because also, since you photograph in black and white, and since black and white is inherently more of an abstraction of reality and it's more expressive than color, it's almost as though what you're photographing, the literal subject isn't necessarily a subject, because when looking at your work, you look at the photos and the photos they're expressing something, they're capturing something beyond specifically what that subject is. So saying, landscape photographer or nature photographer, I think in the context perhaps of black and white is a little bit, it doesn't quite seem like it is the best description. It's really is a tricky thing versus, I photograph in color and I'm trying to oftentimes show something for what it is. So, that particular tree is the subject. Hopefully it, has some sort of emotional connection to it as well. But in the context of that, I'll say landscape photographer. I'll also say, I can't remember what my website says. I think I say like wilderness photography, large format wilderness photography.
Yeah,
which
large format wilderness photography.
I gotta say, it's a little bit of a flex. It is. I think I started saying that for a while just because I think landscape photography, just that particular phrase, has a little bit of a overused, kind of a not negative connotation, but it's seen as something that is so inherently easy to do. And I think the art world would kind of look down upon it as like, oh, you're just shooting pretty landscapes, good for you, that kind of a thing. So I started using the word wilderness photography just because it implies perhaps working a little harder to get out there and to try to find my own subjects, as opposed to, some of the easier to come by sort of subjects and locations and such. And yeah, I shoot a variety of stuff, which is very easy to get to and not far from the road. But I think I'm most proud of the effort that goes into capturing the stuff further away. And you had mentioned, that calling yourself an artist, and I've always kind of shied against that as well. I mean, for whatever reason, it does come across as a little bit pretentious in a way. But now that I've been reading Guy Tell's book Beyond a Rock, I think I've been embracing it more. Do you think that you've changed in your use of the word art, especially since you do both writing and photography? Do you think you've come to embrace that a little bit more as of lately, or do you think you still shy away from it? Or,
like I was saying, I kind of go back and forth. I mean, on Guy's website under his artist statement, I've always really liked the line that he uses where he says, "I do not consider myself a photographer who creates art, but a self-expressive artist working in the medium of photography." And that's always just sat with me really pleasantly. It's just, I struggle to call myself a photographer because everyone these days is a self-designated photographer.
Yeah.
So to like avoid the crowds, you can call yourself like an artist, but then at the same time, that, like I said, sounds like hoity. It sounds pretentious. Like,
yeah,
oh, I'm an artist. Like, I'm making great things, when personally I'm really not. So the whole idea of title is very hard for me to grasp onto.
Because it does inherently become a little bit of a flex in a way. And the other one that is, I don't refer to myself as this because I think it has been just distorted completely. But the term professional photographer.
Oh yeah.
That phrase makes me cringe because that is one that has been just used and abused, both by people who don't act professionally but call themselves a professional, which, I mean, we're talking like gear forum stuff here, which is one of the gear forums are not great places.
No, avoid them.
Yeah. But yeah, the term professional, and that's the thing, like if I am talking to people that I don't know, if some casual gathering or something, they say, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" They usually get a very roundabout answer, because I'm not going to say I'm a professional photographer or I'm an artist. These things just it doesn't fully describe what it is that I do. So usually I'll say something along the lines of, yeah, I take pictures, of out in the wilderness, and that's how I make a living, which is just a slightly different way of saying, landscape photographer.
See, when you offered up that question even to yourself, the first thing that came to mind in my answer was artist. I'm an artist. So
Interesting.
me saying that, like being asked what do you do for a living or however, and me saying that I'm an artist, to me that feels different than writing it on my website.
That's true.
Like saying that I'm an artist on my website versus telling someone I'm an artist. There's some kind of disconnect, I want to say. That's just it. It feels different, and I don't know why. But I do agree with the whole professional versus amateur designation there too, because
Yeah,
like
and
you were
both of those words are kind of like trigger words for me, like amateur photographer, professional photographer. They're both like equally, I think, not good.
well, because you have like
used kind of words.
You have professional that's been abused by everyone who picks up a camera, it seems, and makes a couple dollars here and there on it, versus amateur, where it's everyone looks down on you when you say that you're an amateur, even though the word itself comes from what is it, amo, which is Latin for love. So it literally means to love what you do. So
wow, yeah.
In my view of that, I'd sooner be an amateur photographer for the rest of my life and designate myself as such, rather than say, oh yeah, I'm a professional. Like, because are we ever a true professional at something? It's like calling yourself a master photographer. I've never understood that.
Oh, that's the worst. Now, is there a master amateur?
I
I
don't
we
want
just
to.
created something here.
Yeah, there we go. That's what I'm going to put on my website now. Master amateur black and white artist photographer. That's my tagline now.
I have a friend of mine. He is and I was just going to say professional photographer, but again, that just sounds demeaning. He is a person who takes pictures of other people for a living. And he would oftentimes have to work on location. So he's flying all over for these various jobs. And it's a sort of thing where it's pretty much a studio set up oftentimes on location. And there's a crew that helps him out. And it's a pretty involved process. And so undoubtedly he's flying around a lot. And then sometimes if he's on a plane and the person next to him is just kind of making small talk and they're saying, hey, what do you do for a living? He would never say photographer, because he just knew that the questions that would follow that would just be something he just didn't really feel like. It would lead to a whole discussion, and it's the same discussion over and over again. So he would usually say the most boring thing possible, which would just end the conversation. He'd usually just say, I'm an accountant.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah, there's no follow-up to that. And yeah. So I that was his answer for that, and it served its purpose. That's for sure.
But that just seems so wrong, to feel as though you have to lie about what you do for a living in order to, like, I can understand it when you just don't want to have conversation with someone, you just want to end it to say something else. But there's also this idea that almost embarrassment behind saying that you're an artist because of that starving artist trope.
Yeah.
That whole idea that, oh, you're an artist, I'm so sorry for you. Like, you must not make any money you must not be able to have nice things or whatever.
Yeah.
But like I was talking to my dad about it, the whole photography artist kind of thing. 'Cause I told him about getting in that magazine, and he said just some joking snide remark about, oh, so maybe by the time that you're dead you'll be able to make some money off your work. and I actually told him, because I found this to be fascinating when I found it out a couple of years ago. I was reading a book by Jeff Goins called The Starving Artist. Not sure if you're familiar.
No, I'm not.
I highly recommend picking it up, because within this book he goes through different writers, different more like painters, conventional type artists. And he gives example of Michelangelo. Most people, when they think of Michelangelo, they think of obviously the Sistine Chapel, but more importantly, they think, oh, he must have been some starving, real poor artist.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out he was like a millionaire. He was paid very handsomely throughout his entire career, especially with doing the chapel work and all of that, which it's just interesting to me to think of that whole starving artist trope and how everyone has just aligned with that, to think that artists don't make money or can't have the opportunity to make money as easily as you can if you're working a conventional job.
That is interesting, because that's definitely a very common thing, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why some people will, shy away from saying artist, because it doesn't imply success within it necessarily. I think perhaps it's something that if a person has a rather stressful job where perhaps they're making very good money, perhaps they're daydreaming of being able to do simply what they love for a living, but at the same time just thinking that it's not even possible. I won't be able to pay the bills and stuff along those lines. But I think now, especially with all the variety of different ways of earning an income, I do wonder I would imagine that now it's far easier to become an artist and to earn a living from it, in a decent living where you're not, eating cat food, unless you want to. I haven't tried it. I can't speak for that, but it seems like, now is the time when a person does have that ability, and, social media and all that sort of stuff is a way of getting stuff out there because there aren't the barriers for entry. So I do wonder if that sort of trope is going to change with time. But that is interesting. That's very interesting.
I think the biggest problem now versus back with like Michelangelo, and I wish we had this more, and I guess in a way like with Patreon you do, but it's not as prominent, I don't think. The whole idea of having patrons and people who pay you just to make your art.
Yeah.
Because there's this, social media is a great example of this, and where you are constantly being entertained and swarmed with entertainment, whether it's free YouTube videos or posts on TikTok and Instagram, and people aren't expected to pay for it. But then when you introduce some kind of patronage of, hey, I work really hard for this, I'm not asking you to, go out and buy something or whatever. I'm not throwing ads in your face or anything like that. People shy away from it. And the whole idea of giving up money in exchange for the content that you're creating. Because, the reality is that there's so many YouTube videos being uploaded each day that you're just a little blip in their attention span. So, but for me, I'd much rather, and I try to support the artists that I enjoy watching or that I enjoy their content of. And it's just a shame that we don't have more people with that same mentality, that I'm not expecting to get anything back, but here's some money to create what you love and to keep doing that.
Yeah. And I see that existing certainly on, the high end of things when it comes to, commissions, as you're kind of talking about. But when it comes to smaller stuff, it really is a numbers game. It's a matter of, building up enough of an audience in order to make that feasible on a smaller scale, which is something that is definitely possible to do these days, though there is so much noise in terms of like if I were to think about it, if I were to try to start a YouTube channel now, it most likely would not succeed because there's just so many other people that are out there. So I think a lot of it comes down to timing, being in the right place at the right time when whatever, technology innovations come out that make that possible. And I don't remember the exact quote, but there was something about, if you have an audience of, I don't know whether it was 5,000 people or 10,000 or whatever it was, but if you have enough eyes on their content, then that's all you really need in order to be able to earn an income from something, which is something that social media certainly gives. But also, when everyone else is doing the same thing, it ends up being, there's a lot of competition out there.
Yeah, definitely.
So it gets to be a tricky one for sure.
Yeah. And that kind of brings another topic that we have been shuffling around a little bit, was the idea that if money was no object and you could afford anything that you wish, how would that change your art and your motivations? Which I think kind of goes hand in hand with that. So what are your thoughts on that, Ben?
Ah, man. So I think that if I didn't have to worry about any bills, if I didn't have to worry about mortgages or taxes or anything like that, I think I honestly would be the type that would want to go out more and shoot more, because there wouldn't be all the work that would come along with it. And I gotta say, I think I'd be one of those guys that buys one of those big fancy like Sprinter vans that can go off road. Because like for me, having a shower at the end of the day just puts me in so much of a better mood than going 7, 8, 10 days without a shower and just
Yeah, that's no fun.
So I could see something along those lines in terms of going out on more trips more often, and I think having the means to be able to have more creature comforts when out in the field, I think that would perhaps have a positive impact. But there's also something in human nature where the harder we work for something, the more we appreciate it, and that part would be lacking really. And I think that would have a very negative impact. There was a study a while back, and this may have been, this was, I believe, pre-pandemic and all that sort of stuff. And it had to do with the amount of income that people make and then general happiness. And I believe it was somewhere around like $75,000 a year was, if a person's making that amount, then they are typically in the group that's going to be among the most satisfied, where one can make ends meet with regard to financial stuff. So you're not going to have the stress that goes along with that. But at the same time, you're not getting into that rat race of, once you unlock those other levels of wealth, and now you're, you want to have that next better house, the fancy cars and all that sort of stuff. And then it never ends. It goes all the way up to yachts. So I think once people have over a certain amount of money, and at a certain point, they're also not really working for things as much, then things tend to go a bit downhill. So I think I would have some more creature comforts in the field. I'd probably go out more, but I think it would also translate to perhaps a bit of a kind of a miserable experience, quite honestly.
Why do you say that?
Just because there's nothing to work for.
You'd have to constantly make new challenges to your, especially on the artistic side, just constantly challenge yourself with that. But Yeah, I could see that. I could see that there'd be just a constant state of boredom almost if you can't find new ways of challenging yourself. And
Yeah.
like I think of when Microsoft bought Minecraft from Mojang, and
Mm-hmm.
this guy was like a multi-millionaire at that point. Went out and for first few months bought anything his little heart could desire.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, he sat down and was like, I hate my life. And got
Yeah.
super depressed about everything because of the fact that he could buy anything that he wanted at any point in time because of all of this money, but none of it gave him any happiness.
Yeah.
What had given him happiness, he had sold off. And so he actually went back to Microsoft and was like, can I have a job? Like, can you hire me? Like, doesn't have to be much, but like, hire me back on so I can continue working on what I've spent my entire life creating, pretty much. So
Yeah.
I could definitely see that if you don't have challenges, like in his case, it was a choice of, at least how I see it, you can either go back and continue working on that project or trying to, or you'd have to create a whole new project and challenge yourself to come up with something novel. Because otherwise, you're the only other option then is just to try and enjoy your freedom. But I think in everyone, or at least most people, there's a drive to work and to have some kind of meaning in life. And
Yeah.
with that taken away, you just have nothing to live for.
Yeah.
And I think
What
that
would
would
you
be
do
my
in that
issue.
situation if you had just unlimited means to pursue whatever you want? What do you think that would translate to with your photography and your art and everything else?
The materialistic side of me really wants to say that I'd go out and just get like whatever dream camera I could think of. Like go out
Yeah.
and buy a real nice Leica film camera and stock up on a bunch of film, buy a nice probably 8x10 from Chamonix so I could be more like you, Ben. Shave my head and go out into the
Get some
Utah
get some
wilderness as a
inline
wilderness.
skates and a little
Yeah.
dog. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, but honestly, it probably, yeah, buy a Leica, buy an 8x10 and stock up on that kind of stuff and then just kind of just disappear in the woods and
Yeah.
see how long I could last just doing that. And like you said, you'd constantly have to be challenging yourself in novel ways. Otherwise, you're just going to get bored with it. So most of my time would just be spent writing and making my photography because I wouldn't have to worry about anything else. But like you, I could see that getting really, really old, really boring
Yeah.
because, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think people have this perception of dreaming of like, oh, only if I won the lottery and this and that. Like a little while back when they had that really huge lotto jackpot, it's like 1 point something billion dollars. And then like when I would take our dog over the dog park, all the people are saying like, yeah, I bought our tickets. Yeah, if I win, this is going to happen. Meanwhile, I'm just thinking back in my head, if you win, it will ruin your life. Like
Oh, yeah.
it will be horrible. And I've always kind of thought that I don't buy lotto tickets because it's just I'm decent at math. But if I were to happen to be holding on to that winning lotto ticket, I think I would very much be the person that would be happy enough in some way moving that along to some sort of organization group, something that is actually able to make use of that for doing something good. Because honestly, I think it would be very much a curse on one's life. I think it would be a very,
Look at all the people that win all of that money and then lose everyone around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because their family becomes greedy, their friends that have stuck by them since elementary school or whatever are now thinking, oh, well, where's my cut?
Yeah.
I've been your friend for how long? What is that worth? Like,
Yeah. It'll just
and
destroy all the
that's,
relationships.
yeah, that's the
and
issue.
then you just end up being like isolated in some really cool house. And I don't know. It just, to me, it just sounds like it would be
Introverts
a
paradise.
very, very, yeah. Oh, for sure. It would just be like it would just be a very miserable experience.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting where, I think people daydream about that sort of thing, but they don't really think of the realities of what that amounts to. And also when it comes to, having some sort of challenges, if one were in that position where, you don't have to work, you have a whole life ahead of you, could buy whatever you want. I think you'd probably have to find challenges in other things, whether it's physical challenges, whether, for, I don't know, saying like, oh, I'm going to run a marathon or whatever, or something like that. You'd have to find some sort of challenges that cannot be solved very easily with money in order to, I think, keep yourself in some degree of sanity. But yeah, it's a tricky one for sure.
I think that's why so many people who retire decide in a couple years that, yeah, I'm going to go back to work and work a part-time job. Not because of the benefits or the money aspect of it necessarily, but just because they realize life's pretty boring without a purpose.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that was the case for the camera store I worked at. There were some people that were at or beyond retirement age that were choosing to work there just because they could be involved in things, and they could, it was something that they very much enjoyed. And it was something where, from my standpoint, I'm thinking, wow, man, if I got to the point in life where I'm pretty well set, I don't want to go back to 9 to 5, but I definitely see how, that gives, that sense of purpose and that sense of routine, which would be pretty good. So I have another little experience in regard to skating recently. Something that happened yesterday, which might lead to interesting conversation. So I was skating around this local lake, and I was feeling like I didn't have a lot of energy, and so I've been trying to figure out like the best way in terms of like, when to eat what and all that sort of stuff in order to build up enough energy and all that kind of thing. But I finished the skating, and I'm just feeling like a little lethargic in a way. So I'm just kind of skating around the parking lot, just cooling down. And as I'm getting back into my 4Runner, just kind of hopping in the back seat so I can take off my skates and stuff like that, there was this Toyota Tundra that was parked like one space over. And it was like this young family, this mom, dad, and their little daughter. And they had bikes, so they put bikes in the back. They had gotten in the truck, and they're getting ready to pull out. And as I was hopping in the back of my 4Runner, the little girl pops out. She was maybe like, I'm guessing like 9 years old or something like that. And she turns to me and she says, excuse me, sir, I just wanted to say that you're really good at roller skating. And so I was like a little almost like taken off guard because I was, not expecting that. So I said, thank you. That's very kind of you and all that sort of stuff. But it just got me thinking that here I am thinking that like, I'm worn out, I'm not at the top of the condition, this and that. But just to have that voice saying, you're really good at doing that. It got me thinking a little bit about how when you'll see photographers, artists, anyone that's out there that's doing something, they may be feeling like they're at their very limit. But when viewed from a different perspective, your perception is much different. I could look at a person that is, taking a photo somewhere, and they could just be like, at the very limit of their abilities. But when viewed from an outside perspective, it's a completely different sort of experience. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience for me in terms of how we can get in our own head about something, only to realize that people will have a far different perception, really.
Yeah, that kind of goes both ways. I mean, you look at some of the, sorry, but professional photographers,
Yeah.
and you look at their work that you see on their website or wherever, and you think, I could never be that good. But you have to keep in mind that for every person that you do that to yourself, there's likely another person below you who's doing it to your work, who's looking at your work and saying that same exact thing. I mean, not for my work, of course, but for other people, there are others out there who. So yeah, I mean, yeah,
There was a that same friend of mine who was the one that would tell other people he was an accountant on an airplane. He was telling me that one of the best bits of advice that he had heard from one of his mentors when he was getting into photography was, and this kind of goes the other way a little bit, but it was, if you look at another person's work and if it's not quite as good as it could be, and he was in the context of, this is in the context of like a professional photographing something in a magazine or something along those lines, as opposed to a person who's just doing it for what they enjoy. Though I guess it could apply either way, but it was along the lines of, you don't really know what hurdles they were having to jump over to get to that level. You don't know what sort of restraints and conditions and everything they had to deal with when photographing that. And in the context of commercial photography, there are so many other people involved in terms of, makeup, styling, and all this, all this other stuff involved. But it was along the lines of, if you can't really, without knowing the full story, you really can't judge that work negatively necessarily. So I see how it can kind of go either way, negatively or positively, but without knowing the full picture of what all was involved. And I think it was because perhaps he was maybe a little bit looking at other work and saying, oh, I could do better than that. It more in that standpoint. But in reality, probably couldn't. It was just that level of not really knowing the full picture of what was behind it.
Yeah, that reminds me back, we're talking almost, I want to say 4 years ago now, something like that. I'd gone to, there's like some cosplay convention or something at the local mall, and I knew one of the people that was helping to run it, and so they gave me just a little booth that I could see about selling my art, which in hindsight, really kind of weird to sell nature photography at a cosplay convention, but
yeah, it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, clearly didn't work out like well at all, but still, I mean, cool experience. So the one photograph that I had was more recent at the time, of the Teton mountain range, and how someone had come by, and I thought it was a pretty decent photograph, at least more intimate, the vertical shot of the mountains. And someone came by with a friend of theirs and was looking at it, and it was an older gentleman, and said something along the lines of, "Oh, anyone could do that."
Oh.
I'm like, I think I said something along the lines of, "Well, you can try." Yeah, it's just some kind of like snide remark or whatever. I'd love to see you, like, see what you come up with if you can. Which kind of goes hand in hand with that, of that negativity aspect of it, because like, you never know what led to that photograph, what led to the results that you're seeing.
Yeah. And I've had some similar comments when I was doing some art shows, where there would be a picture of something and someone comes up with their phone and like, see, I have the same picture. And it was not. It was just a picture of something similar.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, come on.
Why do you have to make this about you? This is my moment.
Yeah,
Just go away.
Exactly. Though I will say that was back when I was more taking pictures of more like iconic type stuff. But yeah. And also just to say, you know, a person says, you know, I could do that too. It's like, did you?
Yeah.
Did you come up with that? No, I don't see it, you know?
I always like those comments online when someone's like bashing something else. I'm like, well, where's your work? Like, show me what you can do, because unless you can show me truly work that you have done and created that is just objectively better than what you were looking at, then why are you bothering?
Yeah, it's strange how those that are very quick to criticize don't usually have a gallery filled with inspiring work. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, a little weird.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.